all the way down.
If you want to make
All the way
another
down.
row on the end there, just right on the yellow line, you can probably make one more row. Just right on
All
that
the way
yellow
down.
line. Good job.
Okay, just sit where you are. Sit right where you are. Sit right there.
Yeah, just go back where you were. Go back. Yeah.
Hey, does
Yes,
anybody
go
know
ahead.
what that instrument is
You're
called?
fine.
A guitar.
It's like an old guitar. It's called a dulcimer. It's a mountain instrument. They've been around for a long time. They sound like something you've heard, but not banjo, guitar, or fiddle, or mandolin. Something really old and unique. See if you know this song. You guys would have sang this if you were coming out west in a covered wagon back in about 1850. This song was popular. Anybody know what that song is called? Have you heard the words doo-dah, doo-dah day?
Yeah.
It's in the song, but that's not the name of the song.
Home on the range.
Not Home on the Range. Yeah, I did make this. It's a mountain dulcimer. This one's called an hourglass dulcimer. Can you tell by the shape how it gets its name? They come in all shapes and sizes. That song is called Camptown Races, Camptown Ladies. See if you know this one. It was popular on the frontier as well. Skip to Maloo. I'm going to play this again at the end, then I'll ask you if you figured out what it sounds like. But remember the clue. Something without strings. Sounds like a dulcimer. It isn't fiddle or banjo or guitar. And if you have questions, hang on. We'll leave time at the end. We'll try and answer all the questions then. It's good to be back here at South Weber. My name is Scott Sorensen. I've talked to the fourth graders here several years about the mountain men, some of the history of Utah. Kids ask me every time if I'm really a mountain man. I grew up in the Wasatch Mountains and I went to a school like yours. My fourth grade teacher gave me books about mountain men. Do you know any names of mountain men or trappers or explorers who came here?
Hugh Glass.
Hugh Glass. He was attacked by a grizzly bear and he survived.
Jim Bridger.
Jim Bridger. There's a fort named after him out by Evanston, Wyoming.
Kit Carson.
Kit Carson. He got famous when he guided John Fremont around Utah making maps and trails.
George Bannock.
George Bannock, yeah, I've heard of him. Who else?
Jedediah Smith.
Jedediah Smith, he blazed trails to California.
Andrew Henry.
Andrew Henry, yeah, he was a partner with Jim Bridger, owned part of the Rocky Mountain Fur Company.
John Coulter.
John Calder, he discovered Yellowstone. You guys have some great names.
Brigham Young.
Brigham Young was a pioneer. He met Jim Bridger out on the plains of Wyoming. Yeah,
John Jacob Astor.
John Jacob Astor. He owned the whole Rocky Mountain Fur Company and one of the wealthiest men in the history of our country. Yeah.
Miles Goodyear.
Miles Goodyear built a fort not far from here.
William Henry Ashley.
Ashley, we mentioned, and you know your school's name has a mountain man name in it. Does anybody know what that is? There's a college named after him, and there's also a county named after him.
Brigham Young.
No?
Okay.
South. What's the other name in your school? John Weber was a mountain man. He was here with Jed Smith and Kit Carson. Not a lot of people realize that, but he was one of the players in the mountain man days back then. I read all about them in the fourth grade. I even told my teacher I was going to be a mountain man, but she didn't believe me. She said, Scott, they died 100 years ago. You can't do that today. When I was in high school, I met a real mountain man. He taught me a lot of things. He convinced me I could be one. My mom didn't like the idea. She said, you're living in a dream world. Wake up, do something realistic. You can't be a mountain man in 1980. In over 30 years, I've lived in a log cabin up in Canada on the Kippawa River with my wife and kids. We have a fishing lodge up there. It's a resort. People come from Utah, Texas, even New York City. If they want to get out of the city for a week or two to fish or hike or see some wilderness, there's lots up in Canada. When I was 15 years old growing up here, one fall during the deer hunt, I wanted to go hunting real bad, but I couldn't drive a car. One afternoon, I got my bicycle and started pedaling up a canyon right above my grandma's house. I had my rifle strapped to my shoulder. I went by some hunters in big four-wheel drive trucks. I could hear them laughing. They were saying, look at the kid on the bike. He thinks he's gonna shoot a big deer. I didn't care. I just kept pedaling up the canyon. I got to the top. I only hunted for 20 minutes when a big 6-point buck walked out. I fired my rifle. The deer fell over. I thought it was dead. I walked up, but there was no blood. I realized then I couldn't skin the deer. I left my knife back home in the valley. I figured the only thing was to try and get him onto my bike and pedal him home and skin him there. That didn't work. He was too big to balance. So I grabbed his front legs and pulled him right up over my shoulders. His head was almost on top of mine. I walked over and set him down on the bicycle seat with me on his lap. I tied his front hooves to the handlebars so I could steer. I started pedaling down that road. We got going way too fast. We hit a bump. It knocked me forward off the seat. I couldn't reach the pedals then. They just kept going on their own. I couldn't even hit the brakes to slow down. We hit another bump. All of a sudden, I felt that big deer start to move. When I looked up, I realized he wasn't dead. I'd shot him in the horns and knocked him unconscious. When he woke up and found himself riding a bike down the mountain, that deer got so excited, he started kicking his legs. They got caught in the pedals till he was pumping that bike for me. We kept going faster and faster. We went by those hunters who laughed at me. They weren't laughing anymore. Their eyes were bugged right out. They could see I got a big deer, but he was pedaling me holding his head. We got clear down to the bottom of that canyon going 45 miles an hour, right past my grandma's house. My grandma was in the front yard watering the flowers. She looked up and saw me. She got so excited. She yelled, "Scott, quit fooling around on that bike." By then I was so scared I jumped off the bike and rolled right into her front yard. Last thing I looked up, my grandma was chasing that deer down the road, screaming, "Bring back that bicycle." Now you think about that story. I told students in California, they believed every word. Most of that story is a tall tale. Mountain men told stories and yarns and tall tales, but that's not the reason they came to Utah. Who knows what they were looking for? It was worth money, but it wasn't gold or silver. They weren't miners. Beaver skins. In fact, a beaver skin like this was worth about $7 or $8 to Kit Carson. In 1820, that was pretty good money. Some trappers could catch hundreds in a year. A few got rich. Most didn't survive very long with grizzly bears, buffalo. Some of the Indians weren't friendly. You might drown in a river or freeze in a snowstorm. Most trappers didn't die from old age. This beaver's from Canada. He is darker than some in Utah. There's a Utah beaver from along the Bear River. They have a really light golden brown fur. Why did they want beaver fur? What was made from this the gentleman wore back east? Do you know? It was made from the pelts, but it wasn't pants or coats or shirts or shoes.
Hats.
Mostly beaver top hats. And you've seen hats like this in movies and shows and pictures of Abe Lincoln. Most people don't realize for 200 years all the fancy top hats were made from beaver. It doesn't look like the fur. Hat makers would shave off the guard hair. They would clip the short, thick undercoat of fur, press that into a material to make the hats. Even today, Stetson cowboy hats, the kind people pay hundreds of dollars to wear, they're still made from beaver. And catching a beaver in 1830 was lots of work. I brought a number 3 steel-jawed beaver trap. That's an old-fashioned trap. There are better ways to catch one now. These old traps are dangerous and powerful. If you caught your fingers between the jaws of this trap, it can break the bones in your fingers. Even Jim Bridger was careful. If he took his trap into a stream or pond, he'd stand in the water about a foot deep and place the trap by his knee and push down on the springs. Spread the jaws. That's the dangerous part. They want to slam shut on your fingers until you take the little pin in the center. Push that underneath the pan in the middle of the trap. When you move your fingers out of the way, make sure it doesn't slam shut and catch you. That trap is set. Before leaving the pond, he'd cover it with sand or mud so the animal couldn't see it. He'd use his knife and cut branches off a cottonwood or a willow tree. That's the beaver's favorite food. He'd put the branches in the mud. around the trap. And that night the beaver would swim out to see who'd been in the pond. When it saw the fresh branches, he'd forget everything else and start chewing on those, till eventually its back foot, which was its heaviest foot, got too close to the pan in the center of the trap, and he was caught. See how fast those traps swing? That beaver surprised.
Oh, that's like a mousetrap.
Hey guys, that's the easy part. The hard part isn't catching the beaver. Did some of you think my fingers were between the jaws? Watch carefully. When I push down on those springs and spread those jaws apart, I'm really cautious until I get the little pin pushed underneath the lip of the pan in the center. If you watch my hand, it goes underneath the pan. I'm pushing up on the bottom. I can touch that all day. It won't spring until I release the pan. You won't see me put my fingers back between the jaws. No one's fast enough to pull it out. But I can go underneath. I don't even have to move that finger. You jumped and I told you what was going to happen. They are pretty dangerous old traps. But the hard part is skinning and stretching the hide. Some of the hides were used to make clothing, but it takes a lot of deer skin to make this shirt. I used 5 deer hides plus 4 more for the leggings. There are 9 deer skins on this suit of clothes. Everything on these clothes had a purpose. Do you know why they liked fringe hanging from the sleeves and shoulders? It wasn't there just for looks. It had some practical purpose. There's a good reason for it, yeah. What do you think? It is good camouflage. It looks like branches and leaves and grass. It helps you hide in the brush. If you get caught in the rain, rain drips off the fringe and onto the ground. It even helps keep you dry. For survival, if a trapper was lost in the winter, maybe his horse died or snow covered up the berries and roots he could eat. If he was starving, he might pull fringe off his shirt, put it in his mouth, chew it and eat it. It's just an animal's hide. It's tough and chewy, but deer skin had nutrition. He could survive for days, eating the sleeves off his shirt, boiling his moccasins, chewing his leggings. You're like a walking grocery store with that buckskin on your back. That sounds pretty strange to people now. You can't chew on your baseball mitt or your leather purse or belt or shoes. It might be leather, but now they soften and tan leather with chemicals. Does anyone know what the Indians used for hundreds of years to soften the skin? Something they took from the animals, and it wasn't the fat, the bone, the blood, or the oil. Got to use your head for this.
Buffalo grease?
It wasn't the grease.
The...
Use your head, that's the main clue.
I just realized
Oh.
the name. The brain?
They take the brain from the skull, that's using your head. The brain has a tanning agent in it. Every animal's brain is big enough to soften and tan its own skin. That's what I used on this beaver from Canada. I rubbed the brain into the back until it completely dissolved. The trick is keeping it warm for 2 or 3 nights. They usually fold it down the middle, then roll it up tight. Put it near the fire, even in the lodge or teepee on the buffalo robes where they slept. Their body heats enough to keep it warm. After a few days, they unroll the skin. It is tanned and preserved, but it isn't very soft. It took hours and days of work back and forth between the fingers and hands, breaking down the fibers till it's soft enough to make into clothes. I'm going to show you some pictures of trappers and Indians and animals I photographed. We'll use the screen right behind me. I'll turn the lights off and make sure you're sitting flat on your pocket still so people behind you can see. Is that the switch? Oh, I guess for the other side, is it by that other door? One of you kids get that side there and I'll just come back by the projector here. You're okay, I can get behind
Okay.
everything here. Remember to hold your questions, guys.